BYD is about to destroy the global car market, and American automakers have just 5 years left to survive. This isn't a prediction, it's already happening, quietly, on every continent, while Detroit keeps telling itself the same comfortable lies it's been repeating for over a decade. In a single recent year, BYD outsold Tesla by more than 600,000 vehicles. You heard that right, 600,000. Enough cars to stretch bumper to bumper from New York all the way to Denver. And that staggering lead is only the opening chapter of a story almost nobody in the West is ready to hear. And it all started with a single laugh. A laugh that has aged more catastrophically than any moment in modern business history. The laugh heard around the world. Picture yourself sitting at home in 2011, flipping through channels, and you land on Bloomberg television. The interviewer is Betty Liu, and sitting across from her is a younger, cockier Elon Musk, still years away from becoming the richest man on the planet. Betty leans in and asks him a simple question. What does he think about BYD, the Chinese electric car company, as a potential competitor to Tesla? And Musk laughs. He doesn't smirk. He doesn't politely dismiss them. He throws his head back and laughs out loud on live television and then delivers the line that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Have you seen their car? That was it. That was the entire answer. 4 words, 1 laugh, and the matter was settled in the mind of every executive in Detroit, Stuttgart, and Tokyo who was watching that morning. And you have to understand, that laugh wasn't just Musk being Musk. That laugh was the entire posture of the Western auto industry toward China in a single sound. The assumption that Chinese manufacturing meant cheap plastic, crude engineering, forgettable styling, and a brand nobody outside of Shanghai would ever willingly pay money for. Every boardroom from Dearborn to Wolfsburg was laughing along with him. They all agreed. BYD was a joke. Now, fast forward to today, and look at what that joke has become. BYD doesn't just compete with Tesla anymore. BYD has buried Tesla in global sales. BYD sells more cars in a single month than Ford sells in an entire quarter. BYD operates dealerships in over 100 countries, spread across 6 continents. And while American executives are still holding emergency meetings about their electric vehicle strategy, BYD is quietly building factories on every major continent on Earth, specifically so that no tariff wall, no trade war, and no government intervention can ever slow down what has already been set in motion. And here's the part that should genuinely terrify you. The people who run Ford, who run General Motors, who run Stellantis, they all know this. They read the same reports you're about to hear. They see the same numbers. And behind closed doors, in the meetings they don't want you to know about, they're quietly admitting that the company they laughed at in 2011 is now the company that will decide whether they exist at all by 2030. But before you can understand how BYD is about to finish them off, you need to understand the 4 comfortable lies Detroit has been telling itself for the last 10 years, because every single one of those lies is about to collapse in front of your eyes. The 4 lies Detroit told itself. The first lie is the one that used to be true, and that's what makes it so dangerous. For decades, when anyone mentioned a Chinese car, the immediate reaction was the same. Cheap, because it's bad. Flimsy metal, plastic interiors that crack in the sun, engines that die before the warranty expires. And 15 years ago, you would have been right. But somewhere between then and now, while Detroit was congratulating itself on truck sales, BYD quietly rewrote the entire rulebook on how a car company is supposed to operate. Here's what you need to understand about BYD that almost nobody in the West talks about. They don't buy their batteries from a supplier. They invented their own. They don't source their computer chips from a dozen different vendors. They fabricate them in their own factories. They don't outsource their software to contractors in India. They write every line of code in-house. Every single component, from the lithium dug out of the ground to the leather on the seats in the showroom, flows through a supply chain that BYD owns from end to end. And when you own everything, your costs collapse. So when a Ford executive in Dearborn picks up the phone to negotiate prices with 12 different suppliers, a BYD executive in Shenzhen just walks down the hallway. That's the gap. That's why BYD can sell you a fully loaded electric sedan for around $11,000 and still make a profit, while Ford loses roughly $44,000 on every electric vehicle it ships out the door. You heard that right. Ford loses $44,000 every single time one of their electric vehicles rolls off the lot. But the price lie was only the first one. The second lie was quality, and this is where it gets personal for the Germans. For years, the Europeans insisted that even if Chinese cars got cheaper, they could never match the fit and finish of a real Mercedes, a real BMW, a real Audi. Then European engineers started tearing down BYD vehicles in their own labs, and what they found broke them. The panel gaps were tighter, the crash ratings were higher, the software was faster. The interiors, in several head-to-head comparisons, were judged nicer than the German equivalents at 3 times the price. The quality gap that Europe spent a century building didn't shrink, it vanished. Then came the third lie, and this is the one that should keep every Western engineer awake at night. Detroit told itself that even if the Chinese caught up on price and quality, they could never out-innovate American technology. And then BYD unveiled a battery that charges in 9 minutes. 9 minutes. In the time it takes you to walk into a gas station, buy a coffee, and use the restroom, a BYD vehicle adds nearly 250 miles of range. No Western manufacturer on Earth can replicate that technology right now. Not Tesla, not General Motors, not Volkswagen, not Toyota, not one of them. And the fourth lie is the one Detroit is still clinging to as we speak. The brand lie. The comforting idea that no matter how good BYD gets, no American will ever willingly park a Chinese car in their driveway. But you've heard this story before, haven't you? Americans said the exact same thing about Toyota in 1970. They said it about Hyundai in 1995. They said it about Samsung phones in 2005. And every single time, the West was catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong. Because brand loyalty does not survive a $15,000 price cap and a 9-minute charge. It never has, and it never will. And while Detroit was busy reassuring itself with these 4 dying lies, BYD was already moving pieces across a global chessboard that nobody in America was even watching. The global chessboard. Now let me walk you across the map, because what BYD is doing right now, in real time, is not a business expansion. It's a military-style encirclement of every market that used to belong to somebody else, and most Americans have absolutely no idea it's happening. Start in Europe. While Brussels bureaucrats are still drafting tariff proposals and holding press conferences about protecting European industry, BYD is already building factories inside Hungary and Turkey. Let that sink in for a moment. By the time the European Union finishes writing the rules designed to keep Chinese cars out, BYD will be manufacturing those cars inside the European Union itself, which means the tariffs will not apply. They didn't jump over the wall. They walked around it, bought the land on the other side, and started pouring concrete before anyone in Brussels realized what was happening. Now swing east to Southeast Asia. Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, markets that Toyota spent 50 years locking down with an iron grip. 50 years of dealerships, 50 years of service networks, 50 years of brand loyalty passed down from father to son. And in less than 3 years, BYD has become the dominant electric vehicle brand in every single one of those countries. The Japanese didn't see it coming, and by the time they did, it was already over. Now look south to Latin America, and this one is going to hurt if you're an American. In Brazil, BYD just took over a factory that Ford abandoned. You heard that right. A Chinese automaker is now building electric vehicles inside a plant that Ford walked away from because it wasn't profitable anymore. The ghost of Henry Ford is watching a BYD badge get welded onto cars in a building that used to wear the blue oval. Then there's the Middle East, where BYD is signing fleet deals with governments in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. Taxi contracts, rideshare partnerships, royal family orders. And down in Australia, BYD is already the top-selling electric vehicle brand in multiple states, beating Tesla on its own turf, in a market that speaks English and watches American television. You need to stop and recognize the pattern here, because this isn't opportunism. This isn't a company throwing darts at a map and hoping something sticks. This is a coordinated, precision, executed, multi-continent strategy that is systematically peeling away every single international market the West used to control. Europe, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Australia, all of them, either falling or already fallen. And just when you think the picture couldn't get any worse for Detroit, BYD has quietly pointed its next move directly at the one country American automakers never ever thought they would have to defend. The knife at America's back door. Canada, that's the move. BYD is walking straight into Canada, and if you're sitting in Detroit right now, this is the one you should be losing sleep over, because Canada is not just another foreign market to American automakers. Canada is family. Canada is the one country on Earth that Detroit has always treated as a guaranteed extension of its own home turf. You need to understand what Canada actually represents to Ford, to General Motors, to Stellantis, before you can understand why this is the knife that finishes them off. 5,500 miles of shared border, around $700 billion in annual trade, crossing that border every single year. Canada is the single largest international car buying country for American automakers on the entire planet. When a Ford executive in Dearborn sits down to plan next year's production numbers, Canada isn't listed as an export market. Canada is baked directly into the baseline, the same way Michigan and Ohio are baked into the baseline. It has been that way for over 100 years. Canadians drive F-150s. Canadians drive Silverados. Canadians drive Jeep Grand Cherokees up into the Rockies and Ram pickups across the prairies. This is not a business relationship. This is cultural. A Canadian pulling into a driveway in a Ford truck is as normal as an American doing the same thing. And Detroit has spent a century assuming that this arrangement was simply the natural order of things. Permanent. Untouchable. A birthright. But now, the door has cracked open. Canada. Under pressure from its own electric vehicle transition timeline and the brutal reality of limited affordable options for Canadian families, has quietly loosened its tariff wall to allow a fixed annual number of Chinese electric vehicles into the country. Not a flood, just a trickle. But a trickle is all BYD has ever needed anywhere it has gone. Because BYD doesn't need to win overnight. BYD just needs the door to open an inch. And right now, while you're watching this, BYD is already moving. They are establishing a national dealership network across Canadian provinces. They are training sales staff. They are securing service centers in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary. They are preparing a launch that will not feel like a foreign invasion to Canadian consumers. It will feel like an arrival. A grand opening. A new option showing up in the showroom next to all the old ones. Now, I want you to put yourself inside that showroom for a moment. Picture a Canadian family walking in on a Saturday morning. Mom, dad, 2 kids looking to replace the old SUV in the driveway. They sit down inside a BYD sedan. They see a range of over 600 miles on a single charge. They hear about the 9-minute flash charging. They look at the price tag, and it is thousands of dollars below the comparable Ford or Chevrolet sitting across the lot. The interior feels nicer. The screen is bigger, the warranty is longer, the technology feels like it came from 5 years in the future. And now, I want you to ask yourself the one question Detroit is absolutely refusing to ask itself in public. What exactly is supposed to make that family say no? What is the argument? Patriotism? Patriotism does not survive a $15,000 price gap when you have a mortgage and 2 kids in hockey. Loyalty? Loyalty is a luxury that Canadian families can only afford themselves when the alternatives are worse. And the alternatives are no longer worse. The alternatives are better. The loyalty that American automakers assumed was permanent, the loyalty they have been quietly banking on for 100 years, is about to evaporate overnight. Not over a decade, not over 5 years. Overnight. The minute the first few thousand Canadian families drive those BYDs home and start telling their neighbors, the dam will break. And once a dam like that breaks, nobody in history has ever put it back together. But losing Canada is only the trigger. The real catastrophe is what happens in the 5 years after that. The 5-year countdown. Now, we get to the part of this story that industry analysts will only say out loud, in private. The part that former auto executives will only admit after they've retired and cashed their final bonus check. The part that government advisors whisper about in closed-door briefings, but refuse to put in any official report, because the second it becomes official, the panic becomes real. Here is what they are all quietly agreeing on behind closed doors. By 2030, or 2031 at the absolute latest, the traditional Western automotive business model becomes mathematically unviable. Not struggling, not difficult, unviable. That is the word they keep using when the cameras are off. 5 years. That's the window. That's the clock that is already ticking underneath every single conversation happening in every boardroom in Detroit right now. And you need to understand why that specific number keeps coming up, because it's not a guess, it's a calculation. Every single year, BYD's battery costs drop. Every year, their manufacturing scale grows larger. Every year, their software gets smarter. Every year, their global footprint expands into new countries, new factories, new dealerships. Meanwhile, every year, Ford and General Motors are locked deeper into legacy assembly plants, legacy supplier contracts, legacy union agreements, and legacy dealer networks that were all designed for a world that runs on gasoline. The gap isn't just growing, it's compounding. Every single month that passes, BYD gets further ahead and Detroit falls further behind, and the math on that curve only bends in one direction. And here is the structural trap that makes it impossible to escape. Ford and General Motors cannot match BYD's cost structure without dismantling and rebuilding everything they spent a century perfecting. To get anywhere close, they would have to fire tens of thousands of American workers. They would have to close historic factories in towns that depend on them for survival. They would have to break dealer contracts that go back 3 generations. They would have to rewrite supplier relationships that were signed before most of us were born. They would have to abandon entire product lines that are still selling today. And even if they found the political courage to do all of that, even if they had shareholders patient enough to absorb a decade of losses, even if they somehow had the cash reserves to survive the transition, they would still be 5 years behind BYD on the day they finished. Minimum. 5 years behind on battery technology, 5 years behind on software, 5 years behind on manufacturing scale, 5 years behind on global distribution. You cannot catch a company that is sprinting by standing still and rebuilding your shoes. And then comes the hardest truth in this entire story, the one that lands like a punch to the stomach once you actually understand it. There is a point somewhere in the next few years, and analysts keep placing it between 2029 and 2031, where the gap between BYD and the Western automakers becomes mathematically unclosable. Not difficult to close, not expensive to close, unclosable. After that point, no amount of tariffs, no amount of government subsidies, no amount of emergency bailouts from Washington can save a company that is structurally 5 years, $15,000 per vehicle, and 1 full generation of battery technology behind the global market leader. And here's what that actually means for Ford and General Motors. In plain English, they don't have to lose everywhere to die. They just have to lose in enough places, fast enough, that the math stops working. That's it. That's the whole threshold. And the math is already starting to wobble right now, in real time, while most Americans are still debating whether electric vehicles are even real cars. The clock isn't going to start ticking in 2030. The clock started ticking the day BYD outsold Tesla. You are already inside the countdown, and you didn't even know it had begun. Which brings us to the single most devastating twist in this entire story.
Right.
The part where you realize that the wall America built to protect itself was actually pointing in the wrong direction the entire time. The wall that faced the wrong way. Here is the twist that should make your blood run cold. Because it reframes everything you just heard. America built a massive 100% tariff wall against Chinese electric vehicles. Washington celebrated it as a triumph of industrial policy. Detroit executives quietly exhaled and told their shareholders the threat had been contained. The headlines across every major American newspaper said the same reassuring thing: "We are safe. The Chinese are locked out. The American auto industry has been protected." But stop and really think about what that wall actually did. That wall kept BYD out of the United States. It did not keep BYD out of North America. It left the entire northern border, 5,500 miles of it, completely and totally exposed. Washington built a fortress and forgot that the back door was wide open. They pointed every single one of their defenses south and east, and they never once looked north, because it never occurred to anyone in power that the threat could come through Canada. And now picture what happens over the next 24 months. Canadian families start buying BYDs. Not all of them, not at first, just enough. A few thousand in Vancouver, a few thousand in Toronto, a few thousand in Montreal, and Calgary and Halifax. And every one of those families tells their neighbors. Every one of them posts a video. Every one of them drives that car across the border on vacation, parks it in a Buffalo hotel lot, parks it in a Detroit restaurant lot, parks it right in front of the Ford World headquarters. And American consumers start asking the one question that Detroit cannot afford for them to ask: why can't I have that? And from that moment forward, Detroit is finished. Not because they lose the sales, although they will lose the sales. Detroit is finished because they lose something far more valuable than revenue. They lose the psychological grip on North American automotive identity that has defined American industrial power since Henry Ford rolled the first Model T out of a factory in 1908. The Ford F-150 is not just a truck, it is a flag. It is a symbol of American manufacturing dominance that has flown over driveways from Anchorage to Miami for generations. And that flag is about to start coming down, one driveway at a time, from Vancouver all the way to Halifax. And eventually, inevitably, in American towns too. By the time Washington finally realizes what happened, by the time some senator stands up on the floor of Congress and demands an emergency hearing, by the time the first bailout package gets drafted in a panic, it will already be over. BYD will have already won Canada. The dealerships will already be profitable. The Canadian consumer will have already switched allegiance. The factories will already be humming. And the 5-year clock for American automakers, the one that started ticking the day Elon Musk laughed on live television in 2011, will have already run out. You are not watching a prediction. You are not watching a forecast. You are watching the moment itself, happening in real time, while most of the world is still looking the other way. The laugh has already happened. The factories are already built. The dealerships are already opening their doors. The clock is already running, and it is running faster than anyone in Detroit wants to admit. 5 years, maybe less. And then the century that belonged to Detroit will belong to someone else entirely.